great things are going on, then the pandemic happens, and all of a sudden you're not focused on teaching and learning. You're focused on honestly dealing with conflict, dealing with challenges. I felt like it was like dog years in your superintendency. Honestly, it was like 4 years that probably felt like 12 for most people.
Produced by Podcast Architects.
Welcome back to another episode of The Path Forward. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Rick Fernandez, where we talk innovation, education, and the blending of the two. And I have a very special guest with me today, former superintendent. You can tell by the look in his eyes that he's an educator. And now my colleague at PowerSchool, he's the Director of Education Strategy, Jeff Pelzel. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Rick. Great to be here.
So, Jeff, I know a little bit about you in terms of your educational history, but please just share for some of our Texas folks your career history and a little bit about yourself in general.
Yeah, I mean, I spent 28 years in public education. Actually, I began my career up in Washington State. I was one of those kids who went off to college, came back and taught at the same high school where I graduated from. So here I'm 22 years old teaching with my colleagues who were my teachers growing up. And so that was a real unique opportunity, teaching brothers and sisters of kids that I went to school with, all of that kind of stuff. So needless to say, I wore a shirt and tie because I needed to separate myself from the kids. And then I coached football, basketball, coached volleyball. That was all in Eastern Washington for 7 years or so. And then I transitioned over to the west side, over to a suburb outside of Seattle called the Kent School District. There I was a teacher. I actually did my internship as a high school administrator there. Then I actually transitioned back to Eastern Washington, was the high school assistant principal there for a couple of years. Kent recruited me back. And then, I had the great opportunity to be a middle school principal for 8 years. To this day, honestly, my favorite position. I just really loved leading a kind of a turnaround school opportunity there. That was very rewarding. And then 10 years ago, I transitioned to Southern California to the Newhall School District where I became an assistant soup. And interesting thing that we didn't have these in Washington, but in California, you might have K-6 districts, K-8 districts, 7-12 districts, 9-12 districts, and K-12. I actually went to a K-6 district. Newhall was a K-6 district, and I was assistant superintendent services there for 4 years, and then had the pleasure and honor, honestly, to be the superintendent there from 2018 through 2022.
Very cool. I mean, I got to ask you though on the front end. So when you went back to teach, were there any families or anybody hit you up to give a little bit of slack to some of the brothers and the sisters as a teacher? I got to hear at least one story.
Oh yeah, I mean, I can remember that it was funny because the younger brother of probably the best athlete in our school, he was, I want to say, maybe a freshman or sophomore, and I had him in class. And so of course they want to clown off, they want to not get in trouble, those kind of things. Or, oh, can you just give, come on, just this one test, like I wasn't prepared for it. Can you cut me some slack? It was definitely, I had a lot of that because there were so many, it's a community where I went there K-12. So it's a small community where a lot of kids start there in kindergarten and go all the way through 12th grade. A very, very kind of rural community, I guess, in Eastern Washington. Definitely some of those situations from kids, and then crazy enough, parents even approaching you about, this is the interesting one, playing time, right? Playing time.
Oh,
yeah, right.
we know a little something about that in Texas. Of you're not doing, you can't do anything right as a coach. It's just you didn't play the right guys, you didn't call the right plays. I mean, it doesn't matter if you win or lose. Everybody's got an opinion. I got to imagine that but having that experience, were you able to have conversations in a different way because you knew the families and the kids, and like, could you say some things like, look, you got to get it together, instead of having to go through all the rigmarole?
Yeah, and I think yes. I mean, that was definitely the case too. And thankfully, sometimes I think back to this. I think I was actually a pretty good kid in high school. Honestly, that made a difference. I played football, I played basketball, so I was known. My parents owned business in the community. So coming back was kind of like this year coming back, and it's kind of an honor, honestly, to do that. But you definitely could have different conversations with families when it needed to be. that you probably wouldn't have had as a traditional teacher, not having a relationship with the families. That and kids would even step up if kids were kind of clowning off and like knock it off kind of thing. So that definitely was a benefit.
That's awesome. You talked a little bit about your California history, and one question I always had, I could never figure out when I traveled to California to see campuses, and I got to do that with InCust. I never understood how you could have an elementary in one district, and then the kids would go to the same middle school, but that middle school would be a totally different district. So I was always wondering, like, how do you get the alignment right, or how do you cooperate, or know? Can anything from your perspective on how California just does school?
Well, it's just a great question. So, example, in the Santa Clarita Valley, which is where my school district was located, there were three K-6 this, well, actually TK, because transition kindergarten became a thing, which is, now it's all 4-year-olds. So uh, we had three of those TK through 6 districts and then one K-8 district, and we all fed into one 7 through 12, what's considered a high school district. And so, I can remember being a middle school principal right in a large district in Kent where I had 9 elementaries feeding into Y1 middle school. That's always interesting, right? Because the different training, leadership, and coming from schools that you can just honestly you can pick out which kids came from where. And just in talking to the high school, that was definitely the case as well because I guarantee you the 4 elementary districts we didn't align on what we were necessarily doing. Of course, we were teaching to the same standards, but our approaches to teaching and learning were quite frankly very different.
So you would you say it's fair that every year you're having to start over to some degree just because you don't know what you're getting from the other campuses?
Well, I was in the elementary, so that isn't the case. But at the high school level, I think that's the most interesting thing. I mean, here's to your point, I guess this is what's interesting. So, we were in declining enrollment. So one of the things that we did was we did a heavy marketing campaign because California has a school of choice opportunity, so parents can send their kids wherever they want. So we had really good academic outcomes, despite, when you look at our demographic data, you wouldn't expect us to have such high outcomes. We had 5 Title I schools, 5 non-Title I schools. Yet when you look at our state assessment results, we were, like if you look at 6th grade math, we were like 25 percentage points higher than the next closest elementary district in Santa Clarita. And so, yeah, I mean, the issue, I think, or maybe a little bit of a challenge is when we did that marketing campaign, we had lots of kids coming in year after year from our feeder, our competitor elementary districts, and then also even outside of it. So that means, you have 110 new kids or new families coming into your school district. They have to sort of learn that new hallway. So yes, in some ways, yeah, you're reacclimating, getting them used to, what your expectations are for your school district, which was different, and that's bound to be the case.
So talk to me a little bit about your superintendent experience and from the time that you got the job and the excitement and then ultimately your experience while you were there.
Yeah, I mean, to say I was elated to get that job was completely an understatement. I transitioned to California when Common Core was actually just beginning. So, as an assistant soup, I began the implementation of the Common Core standards, the adoption of our reading and ELA resources, our math resources. So that's what I led as an assistant superintendent. So coming out of that in 2018, I transitioned into this role. So I was deeply vested in the work that was done from an instructional perspective. Um, but, my goal, I mean, honestly, from probably my 3rd year of teaching was I wanted to be a superintendent. And here I was now superintendent of the district that I had been leading all the instructional work and a complete honor, really rigorous, really, really rigorous interview process. I mean, I went through a lot of interviews, of course, in different positions, but that
Sure.
superintendent interview is different. This is different, especially when you get to the final interview and you're an in-house candidate, right? Because they're comparing you against your competitors. And so now
Yep.
they're letting it fly in that last session where they're wanting to know, because you're succeeding someone who worked above you. Maybe there were things that they like about that superintendent they don't. They want to know how you're going to do things differently. Um, so that was great. I mean, the really cool thing is that transition was easier because I had relationships with those board members. as an assistant superintendent. So that did help. And there's some things that happened right away that were really, really great after my first year. We had 3 of our 10 schools chosen for National Blue Ribbon. So to be able to go
Oh,
back to
nice.
DC, yeah, I mean, we were the only district in the state of California to have more than 2 during that year. And so that was a huge, huge honor for us to be able to do that. And then lo and behold, and we get to welcome in the pandemic. And so, he spent 2+ years, 2.5 years in the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic. That was, as my predecessors, I had 2, one superintendent who hired me, and then of course 6 months later he said, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to be leaving." I'm like, "You're kidding me!" And then another gentleman they brought in, a great relationship with both those gentlemen, and they said, uh, you've gone through things that I never went through in 20 years as a superintendent or 15 years as a superintendent, and they said that to me after 2 years. So it was just, it was just an interesting time to be leading a school district.
So ultimately, you made the choice to jump to the private sector with PowerSchool. Talk to me a little bit about that process. What was the factors that played into that?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great question because I always wanted to be a superintendent. You get there, great things are going on, then the pandemic happens, and all of a sudden you're not focused on teaching and learning. You're focused on honestly dealing with conflict, dealing with challenges, and so that I felt like it was like dog years in your superintendency. Honestly, it was like 4 years that probably felt like 12 for most people. And so as I began to think about, what am I doing? I've got 4 years in here. Am I going to stay for another year, another 5 years? I started seeing things like, for California, funding is already a challenge in California. We're towards the bottom, I think 45th or something in the United States around state funding. And of course, we know educators deserve to be paid more. That's an ongoing challenge. And we did, and we were able to pay them more during the pandemic. But I knew once these funds and these additional funds went away, we were going to face a gigantic fiscal cliff, which is going to be really, really rough because you get used to hiring and having these additional supports, but now you got to peel them away. So there's going to be a lot of conflict happening around that and not being able to continue with salary increases. And then I started seeing the political landscape of school boarding. I had the
Yes.
most amazing board. I mean, the most amazing board, phenomenal people, always put kids first. But for the first time, I started seeing opportunities where we had an election coming up, and one of the board members was not going to rerun. There was a longstanding board member that was going to rerun, and our teachers union in California is very strong across all of California. And for the first time ever, I think historically in Newhall School District, the teachers union began endorsing candidates, which I think is an interesting thing because you get elected, then what have you promised? You don't get elected. And if you're not endorsing the existing board member, then how does that board member feel if they win and then the union didn't endorse them? Lots of conflict potentials there. And then I just started thinking about my personal why, honestly, Rick, and it was like, okay, you've led a district, you've done things successfully. My why grew bigger. How can I impact more kids beyond leading a singular school district? And I think back to when I was a middle school principal, then everyone was like, well, when are you going to be a high school principal? Because I was a high school teacher. I mean, I began teaching high school math and psychology. And when the jobs opened up, I'm like, I'm a middle school principal. What? Okay, I go to the high school. You just have more nights, bigger kids, get more night events. I'm like, no, I'll stick right here where I'm at. And then that's what I began to think about it being a superintendent. Do I go to a high school district, a 7-12 district? Do I go to a K-8? Do I go to a K-12? I'm like, I think I need to look at something different. And honestly, I didn't know when I left and made the announcement that I was leaving I made the announcement in March of 2022, left at the end of June of 22. I didn't have anything lined up. I just knew that there was something that was going to be out there for me. And what's interesting is I did talk to a number of vendors that we worked with, and I kept saying to them, you guys have awesome products and you have actually really good account managers. You're good salespeople, but you don't know anything about what goes on behind the scenes for a school district. And they kept saying, you're right. like, we should talk. And then we were engaging and talk. And then lo and behold, as I'm just looking through things over the course of 6 months, there's a job description that pops it, and honestly, on LinkedIn, and I look at it and I'm like, that is this job that I've been talking about for the last probably 9 months. And lo and behold, that's how it fell into this opportunity.
So, what was the biggest aha moment going from public to the private sector, where you're like, oh, wow, this is totally different in how we do business and what the metrics are?
One thing that really stood out right away is the frequency at which people come and go at any time. During the school year, you don't necessarily, like, your teachers stay until the end of the year, generally speaking. Your administrators stay. Like, classified, that might come and go, in a school district, but yeah, people are looking and they just go. Like, and all of a sudden it's like they got another job and oh, there's no one there. So that is one thing that really stood out. And and then let's get real here. Right now, where am I at? I'm sitting in my home office. So to get up in the morning, make my breakfast, and then walk up the stairs 2 flights to my home office to go to work, that was a lot better commute than I had a good commute anyway. Where when I was a superintendent, it was like 12-minute drive, but the 15-second walk, not bad. So that really stood out for me. I was like, okay, there's a difference in what your day looks like, honestly, quite frankly, your productivity looks like when you work from home. If you're disciplined, the amount of work you can get done, it's crazy, crazy, crazy positive.
So when I was making the transition to the private sector, one of the things I was struggling with is, how do I take this 20-year long commitment, right? And I'm going to go totally do something else where I'm clearly not going to be the expert. I'm going to be a fish out of water. I got to find my place in my lane and start to learn at a very rapid rate. It's a nerve-wracking experience. Talk to me a little bit about when you're making that choice. We're like, all right, there's no going back after this. What are all the things you were thinking about as you're making that decision?
Well, I mean, first of all, I've never been in sales of any sort in my entire life. Even as a child, even as a kid growing up, I never did that. I mean, I worked in a grocery store, kind of thing, or worked for my dad in in his business. I never did sales. So I'm like, I don't know what this feels like, honestly, for me in sales. Um, and with PowerSchool, there's like 20 solutions. I didn't know. I knew of PowerSchool as a student information system, but there's all these different solutions. And that actually is what gave me anxiety in the beginning, because I'm like, I need to become the expert on these 20 solutions. How am I going to get caught up to speed? What is this going to look like? And then literally, I think when I sat in my second meeting, I'm like, this is actually really cool, because I actually know what the people on the other side of the fence are feeling. That was kind of the magic sauce in all of this, is like, I've walked in their shoes. I know what their challenges are. I've looked at their strategic plans. That was the beauty of, and then I felt, honestly, that's when I felt comfortable.
Do you feel like it's the same kind of adrenaline rush when you're helping you've got these two entities and then there's a disconnect or one doesn't understand the other, and then you're the connective tissue? Is it the same adrenaline rush that you feel like when you're helping teachers or you're helping an administrator or a parent as an educator? Because that's what I find, is that I get the same feeling of I'm doing something that's going to be beneficial for kids. Is that your experience?
Yeah, I mean, and don't you think oftentimes, like as a superintendent or even a principal, oftentimes you're the bridge between the family and the teacher, the family and the principal, the conflict, if there's conflict or whatever you're trying to work through. And that's literally what I describe my role as. I describe my role as a bridge between our account managers and our solution folks that work on all the solutions and our school district leaders. There's such a parallel to what's going on in terms of the role that I think you and I are serving in, especially now at PowerSchool. I completely agree with what you're saying.
What do you think the provider sector gets wrong more than anything about education? Obviously, they don't know the inside baseball, but just in general, I'm kind of astounded sometimes at working with a bunch of providers. I'm sure you have, of how far they're off base on certain things. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree that they don't know the back end of it. So I think more vendors are now starting to consider roles like you and I serve in PowerSchool to gain some insight into what's going on. But I think oftentimes the understanding of just how complicated it is to take on initiative within a school district to lead change management. And so, and also, oftentimes there are leaders in an organization that they themselves don't know how to lead change management. So how do you help them with that process? And so you think, oh, well, they just need to buy our assessment platform. Do you realize the training that's going to have to go in front of the teachers, the buy-in you're going to have to get in front of your teachers to say we should be making this switch? There has to be a real pain there for it to go for it to be an easier transition. If there's not necessarily a pain or a complaint from teachers or a complaint from administrators, it's a lot harder to make a switch. And especially depending upon your culture in your district, that process, like for us in Newhall, we would involve lots of stakeholder feedback, whether it was grade level teacher leaders, the site administrators. We would put together committees often anytime it involved any kind of change. And because we did that, when we went to the board, it was adopted. We didn't have challenges going forward because we had gathered input. Not everyone necessarily agreed with where we were headed, but they understood why.
Absolutely. I try to use the analogy, if someone was going to offer you to move into a brand new house, but it was only a block away, what would it take for you to go through that pain, right? Like, how good would the deal on the house? How much would you have to make on the house you're selling to, you're perfectly happy with the house you have. Or it's okay. It's, we've had it for a while. It's not terrible. We're comfortable with it. It's not as efficient. Where's that threshold of, all right, well, we'd be saving this amount, or there's so much more square footage that we can't say no. Like, I always think of it in those terms. Like, it's got to be something that's really going to create urgency, or there's a value that's so irresistible that, all right, we'll go through the pain of the change management piece, or a long implementation and the training that's required, because it will make sense at the end. I always try to think about it like that. Like, what if I
Good
had to move, like,
analogy. Yeah.
yeah, like next door? Like, I wouldn't do that it would take a lot for me to, to like, all right, let's load it all up, so I try to take it in that perspective. It's got to be very compelling for us to jump in and start changing things. You know, what do you think in terms of, so I've been a part of the team for almost a month now, and I've seen some unbelievable opportunities in terms of the technology that schools can utilize. What are you most excited about in terms of PowerSchool and just the service that we're given to school districts?
Well, I obviously the hot topic right now is AI. I just, I sat in a meeting yesterday with a couple of leaders from Oakland Unified School District, and I just the thing that just really that I it keeps resonating with me is it's interesting. We've sort of seen technology as this resource, as a tool in life that's kind of disconnected people because we're on our phones at dinner, we're tapping on our phone, we're not paying attention, we're not quite as attentive. And I actually think in education, AI now is going to turn that like, oh, it's polarizing. We don't want kids on devices. It's actually going to change it so that our teachers finally have time to build relationships with kids. It's going to afford administrators time to be out in the classrooms so they know how they can best support their teachers. It's going to allow district level leaders to be on campuses to know how they should actually be providing professional development and what the needs are through observations rather than like a survey or just this kind of guessing like, oh, here's our next initiative, this is the way we should be heading. So and then again, even for parents, it's going to allow parents more time to parent and give back time to their kids because the kids are going to have it like a more personalized homework opportunity, so it's going to actually be at where the kid's level is, and the parent's not going to be dealing with a frustrated child. The teacher's not going to be coming to school feeling just worn out and tired because the night before they spent 4.5 hours creating an assessment for the end of a unit, an algebra 1 assessment or something like that. I just really believe it's going to create more work-life balance. It's never going to be perfect in education. Education is a demanding field. It's kind of a calling. You go into it because you just have this calling to support kids. but I really do think it's going to actually create this more personalized environment where relationships are going to come to the forefront. And it's going to make that job that already is really rewarding, even though it's really demanding, it's going to feel even that much better. That's just what stands out to me. And I think the journey that we're on at PowerSchool, it mimics it on every front, not just the teacher, but I'm talking in HR to finance, every persona, even the tech department. I really think it's going to transform education.
I love the AI component, and I'm excited to see how school districts are going to be able to apply that to make their processes and their experience better for their stakeholders. I think I'm most excited about like the unified insights, the data as a service, the connected intelligence, because one of the problems that we've always had in education is we have our quantitative data. It's usually the autopsy data, right? So after the test, and then we come back and then, all right, well, it's too late to do anything now about it. So we try again next year. But there's all these qualitative pieces and so much anecdotal data that we really don't know how to use it and what it means and how's it connected to the testing data, the quantitative data. I'm so excited for an administrator to be able to look in either at their phone or a screen or a report and see how everything is interconnected. Every decision I made, from my finances to my staffing to our educational outcomes, this is where it's all happening. And are my priorities aligned with my pocketbook and with what we're doing? To me, I think that will be just a transformational opportunity for school districts, because then you take all of that guesswork of throwing darts at programming or throwing darts at training or all the time and effort that we require of our teachers and our students and our families. And we can now look and say, is there time spent elsewhere that would be better, better opportunity for our kids? So to me, I think that's the best spot.
Yeah, and I think the use of AI to talk to your data, to be able to create these correlations. Like you're thinking about your strategic plan. We did A, B, did it A and B, did it yield the results that we were hoping to? We can actually create these through lines. And the one other thing that I think about, you talked about it, like connected intelligence and that data lake. Having gone through a ransomware attack in the middle of the pandemic, that was the other blessing I got. If I had had a solution like connected intelligence, I wouldn't have worried about that because I would have had every piece of data that would have been backed up the last 10, 15, 20 minutes. I would have said, let that information that we lost the last 10, 15 minutes go. Now, the other good thing too is PowerSchool solution has never been hacked. So that's even a better, but today you're kind of in this era is not if you've been hacked, it's going to be like when it's going to happen. It's going to happen. So I look at that solution too as a great resource. And then what you can do, like you said, around the data and analytics, and it's kind of this limitless ability to draw these through lines and correlations to the work that's really going on inside of the school district.
If you found yourself back in the seat of a superintendent, let's just say, I don't know, 10 years down the road, there was just some dream job. What's the first thing you would do now that you've been on the other side and been out of it for a while?
I'd go to my CBO. I'd look at when all of our contracts are up. And then I would look and think about the selling cycle that goes on inside of an organization and when is the best time for me to buy and renew for contracts. Because I think I would now know how to leverage different selling cycles, be able to move forward. And then the second thing is literally, I would for sure get connected intelligence. And I agree with you, the data analytic piece right behind that. I would get the connected intelligence or analytics and insights. I would get that in place right away because I think that's going to be the driver of everything that moves forward. Because we, like you said, we can't do the autopsy stuff at benchmark assessments. It's just too late. We really need data in front of us at all times to really make sure we're making the most informed decisions. But those are kind of the two things that I would definitely begin thinking about. I think that could save us some money.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. 100%. The more efficient that districts get, the better position they'll be for serving students. There's no question about it, especially in this day and age. We've got the same budget issues that you guys have in California, down here in Texas. It's just, it's real tough. There's a lot of layoffs happening right now across our state, and great friends and seeing, educators that have been pouring into the system a long time no longer have a place to call home. So the efficiency will be critical, particularly for keeping jobs and making sure that your resources are allocated. So I couldn't agree more. You want to do some rapid fire as we wind down here?
Sure, not a problem. I'm game.
All right. What was your GPA in high school?
3.9.
Wow, you knew that way too fast. All right, what about college?
3.78.
What kind of student were you in college? Great student? Did you go to
Yeah,
class? Yeah.
literally, I'll tell you, this is a funny story. Okay, so I literally one time woke up late. It was, and here's, get this, the class was like coaching basketball. It was in a PE elective or something like that. I woke up 40 minutes late for class, ran to class for the last 10 minutes, and the teacher said, nice of you to join us, Pelzel. That was my like, oh my God, I better be here every single day to all of my classes. I didn't skip class. I actually, honestly, I could be a lifer, college student. I loved being in college. I loved the athletics. I didn't play college sports, but I love being a part of it, the intramurals. And I actually kind of like to study. I like to perform. You know, when you're successful at it, it's kind of rewarding to study, yield an outcome, and feel success of it. So but that stood in my head. I think it was a sophomore in college, maybe my second quarter, and that happened to me, and I'm like, oh my God. And the guy who was teaching the class was the head coach of the boys basketball team, and my roommate was on the team. That's part of why he knew who I was.
Yeah, it's you were scared straight, so to speak, from that
Yes, yeah.
from that outcome. All right, if you had one event you could have front row tickets to, any event, could be sports, entertainment, doesn't matter. What would you choose?
Super Bowl.
Super Bowl. So you're football
Yeah,
first.
yeah. Well, I think from an event perspective, I think I love basketball probably more than football, but from an event, I think I'd want to be at the Super Bowl.
Super Bowl. Okay. Any team in particular? I'm scared to ask it. I'm figure you're a 49ers guy.
No, go Hawks.
Uh,
Originally from Seattle, so I'm a diehard Hawk fan
well, y'all had it good for a while there with
for a
Russell
while.
and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yep.
All right, last one, and we'll let you go. Last meal that you ever eat, what's it going to be?
I'm vegan, so my last meal is going to be at my favorite plant-based sushi restaurant because that's the one thing I miss having transitioned to being a vegan connoisseur now is actual sushi. I'm going to get that. I have some great ones here in LA. That's what I would want to have.
You should have never let me know that piece of information because now that's a personal Texas challenge. When you come down here, I'm gonna try to hide some steak in the avocado burrito or whatever, whatever you guys eat.
My body will go into shock.
Dude, getting off the plane, I'm handing you a T-bone and firearms, right? Just like because
And
we're
I'm
in
not that
Texas.
hard. Yeah, I'm not that hardcore, but yeah, my body might go into shock. I haven't had meat in like 5 years.
Yeah. Before you know it, you'll be in a deer stand eating with a T-bone with your hand.
Yeah, for sure.
No, man, I really appreciate you spending some time with me, and more so than that, man, I really appreciate you taking time with me as I've joined the team. You've been great. Kelly's been great. Jonathan's been great. Everybody at PowerSchool has been just unbelievable with helping me get acclimated and answering questions and just making me feel like part of the team, man. So I really appreciate that, and it's made a great start to this experience for me. So thank you for that.
No problem. And we're more than elated. It was a long search to find you. As they said, finding you and I in this position, it's like a needle in a haystack. It's a hard find to find people who have experience that want to also still continue to work full time, right? It's a hard find. So once you and I had that first conversation, I'm like, that's our dude. So I'm really glad you're part of our team and joining Power School and excited for the journey that you have in your Texas State strategy work. So welcome again.
Excellent. When I come that way, we can go get some seaweed and some, or what avocados, whatever. I love all food, so you're not gonna.
Okay.
I'll eat anything. Well, if you like what you heard and like what you saw, please hit the like, subscribe, and share with your friends. And thank you for joining this episode of The Path Forward.
Produced by Podcast Architects.